Okay, good morning. In Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs, it's January 24th. And we have Ellen here. I think we can get through more than 8 pages in the next 2 hours. I would really like to see if we can start getting Damien in the witness chair and let Ellen move on to other things for a little while. But that would help us get through the sections of our housing bill related to local zoning and Act 250, as I understand it. So Ellen, thank you.
Good morning, Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. We are looking at draft number 0091, draft 5.1 dated January 19th at 5:31 p.m. I started the walkthrough on Friday, and so we're picking up on page 12, section 9. So section 9, we're still talking about municipal zoning, but this is a sort of new concept. It is a concept not currently in Vermont statute anywhere, but it is regarding permit decisions for municipal zoning. So 24 VSA 4464B, decisions. A decision rendered by the appropriate municipal panel for a housing development or the housing portion of a mixed-use development shall not increase the minimum lot size required in the municipal bylaws. Onto page 13. Increase the minimum parking requirements required in the municipal bylaws and in section 4414, which is the first section of this bill. Reduce the building size to less than that allowed in the municipal bylaw, including reducing the building footprint or height. Reduce the density of dwelling units allowed in the municipal bylaws, and otherwise disallow a development to abide by the minimum or maximum applicable municipal standards. So I'll stop there quickly and then I'll read the next part. So this is talking about the appropriate municipal panel is either the DRB, the Development Review Board, or the Board of Adjustment, however the town has structured it. But it's when an applicant for a housing development or a mixed use development, which is a development that includes both commercial space and affordable housing units together in the same project. When they apply for a permit, the appropriate municipal panel who's issuing the permit cannot alter the minimums and maximums that have been set in the bylaws. And so what this means is that if the applicant has applied for the maximum number of units that is allowed under the statute, and based on what this bill has said, up to 5 units per acre, the municipality cannot, in the permit decision, reduce the number of permits, reduce the number of units that they are allowed to build in that permit. So they can't use the permit decision to subvert what is established in the statute as well as in the bylaws. And I think that this has been a common tool for municipalities. They sort of use it to make projects more palatable. They can, someone applies for a permit and then they can sort of adjust the size or dimensions of a project to address any concerns or mitigate any impacts. But this is setting out that the default is they cannot do that, but there is an unless. So on page 13, line 9, however, a decision may require adjustments to the applicable municipal standards established in subdivision A if the panel or officer issues a written finding stating why the modification is necessary to comply with a prerequisite state or federal permit, a municipal permit, or a non-discretionary standard in a bylaw or ordinance, including requirements related to wetlands, setbacks, and flood hazard areas and river corridors, and how the identified restrictions do not result in an unequal treatment of housing or an unreasonable exclusion of housing development otherwise allowed by the bylaws. So if the town can demonstrate that they need to properly accommodate for wetlands or setbacks from other projects need to be complied with, if they can demonstrate that there's a state or federal permit maybe related to capacity, wastewater capacity or something, if they can demonstrate that there's a limitation established by another set of permits that would directly impact the size of this project, they need to lay that out. And they also need to demonstrate in the written decision that there is no unequal treatment of housing or unreasonable exclusion of housing. So this is a pretty substantial change. It's titled by right, but it's not, it's sort of framed as by right zoning, which is a different type of zoning that some other states have used. And so it's establishing that the municipality, once they've established their bylaws, setting these minimums and maximums, they can't change them indirectly through the issuing of permits.
Senator.
Some of municipal statutes talk about providing open space, providing paths, recreational paths. There's some land that is ledge or that might block your neighbor's view shed. Are those all excluded? And if it says you can have 16 houses an acre, it's 16 houses an acre, and you can't require anything that might be based on the topography, such as granite ledge. I mean, this is pretty extensive.
So you listed a few different things that are disparate in my mind. I don't think most of those things are actually addressed in these statutes. Like there isn't a statutory requirement that there be a view shed. There are, it gets complicated because character of the area is actually an entirely different subject, not here.
Yeah.
And so,
I mean, I know someone who ended up in court, I believe, had to remove because they built higher than they blocked the neighbor's view of the Gold Dome.
right.
I've written sales contracts with view protection abatements in them, which limits the height that the neighbor can build on his vacant lot. I'm trying to figure out what problem we're trying to solve, and it's maybe because I'm new, but
I mean, I see this as trying to set a standard and not move the goalpost because you don't want a particular type of housing, or you don't all of a sudden, you know, there's a new argument that's being made that wasn't, you know, that creates inconsistency where someone comes thinking, I'm looking at what's here and what's allowed, and now I'm being told the new neighbor doesn't like it. I mean, I don't know, you know, I don't know that we can get into everybody's sort of detailed circumstances of covenants and areas where you said
I
you don't
can't
have.
build anything but colonial architecture in my street. I don't know when a brick ranch house became colonial architecture, but that's what
Right.
it says.
But everyone knows that, so no one's like coming with a modern build.
We've put a few new ranch houses on the street.
But also, correct me if I'm wrong, this only applies to the downtown and village center, or does this apply townwide?
Townwide.
Anywhere where there's bylaws.
Yeah.
Okay. Because this subject came up last year in testimony about the covenants of green space, as we talked about density, that we wouldn't want to get rid of the parks and green spaces that have been protected by covenants. I don't think anything we would do would change that.
Right, so that is not addressing that aspect.
But that was one of her questions.
Right, so that's not part of this. It is requiring that if a municipality is going to change, the municipality has established in their bylaws minimums and maximums, like the parking maximum of 1 per dwelling unit,
1.5.
or the 5 units per acre. They cannot, in the decision, reduce the number without laying out why it is necessary for them to do that and how they're not having an unequal treatment of housing.
So I know I had assumed, and clearly wrongly, that these proposals were to apply to our downtown and village centers, not to the whole town. Because what we're trying to do is promote greater density in our downtown and village centers. So by right, this proposal by right applies to the whole town.
Yes. The whole town where they have their bylaws have already set forth.
Certain mins and maxes.
Yeah.
But the challenge here is if we're trying to protect, towns have a lot of undeveloped space. I don't see the undeveloped space. I don't want to see undeveloped space. I mean, part of the whole point of this is to focus our attention for development downtown village centers. I don't want to see the same density out where it's now undeveloped. So there's nothing here that would, it's only where, but I mean.
This is where they've set minimum and maximum requirements already for development and housing. So it's where they said.
And do those relate, do those correlate with downtown and village center designations?
Not everyone has them.
No, not necessarily, but this is
everyone.
not establishing any kind of, this in itself isn't establishing minimums and maximums for undeveloped, or what would be probably zoned as like rural, low density. It is requiring the municipalities permit to uphold what they have established in their bylaws. And so if they have zoned, rural ag district differently, then this has to, the permits issued under that need to comply based on that standard. This is not intended to increase density in places where the town has not already established that, but just to maintain that they are using the bylaw as they have set it out.
Got it, and not applying something through an individual permit that would change that.
Yes.
Okay,
Let me
but
let Senator, oh, is this a direct?
earlier, didn't we say that they could not have dense, we put some restrictions on, it said they had to allow eighth of an acre zoning?
So eighth of an acre zoning is not in this.
It's not
It's
in
not in
this.
this bill.
Where
There
is it?
What is in this bill is a requirement that municipalities allow up to 5 units per acre.
So fifth of an acre.
So they could zone,
And that's
but it
not
is not
municipal.
mandating minimum lot sizes. So they could do it by allowing 1/5 of an acre lot sizes, or they could do it by allowing duplexes on how many? Whatever of an eighth.
3 on half an acre, 2 on
Yes.
another, like a duplex.
So it is not mandating how they actually achieve 5 units per acre, but that their zoning doesn't impede 5 units per acre.
And that's in a different place than what
And-
this is saying.
And
Correct.
right,
Yeah.
I think it's not in this by right section, and that does apply to downtown and village centers, the 5.
Yeah, well, it's municipal water and sewer, which we can revisit, but it's, if that's quadruplexes.
Right. I think,
I'll have to make
once
sure
we,
I look that
once,
up.
it would be great
Right.
to have a chart for each
Yeah.
section, and
Yeah.
what it allows and what it doesn't allow, so we can be clear on, because I want to be clear on what we're green lighting in downtown and village
Right.
centers,
Sure.
and what we're making possible for the whole town.
And again, we're looking at it now and we're hearing a lot about which designation should apply to what. So I'll let her walk through it and then we can let her go back this week and help us summarize what the decisions are.
right, and I think that this by right provision is intended to be achieving the same goal in a different way as the prior section in saying, okay, we are requiring that towns allow through their bylaws 5 units per acre. They cannot then get around that requirement by then only issuing permits for 3 units per acre. That is sort of the intent of this section, because the prior sections only specify that the bylaws have to dictate something, but the towns also have control over the permits they issue and how they condition those permits. So this is another means at getting at that same goal.
Not letting them move the goalpost somewhere else on whatever we decide should take place in the first section.
So every town has to allow 5 units per acre somewhere,
In their areas that are served by municipal water and sewer.
water and sewer.
Yes,
That's the ticket.
yes.
So
What if the topography doesn't work? I mean,
That'll make it more expensive and people may not want to do it.
And also they'll
Right.
need to justify that
with the
in their
bylaws.
decision.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right, and you could say, okay, the topography doesn't work for the whole acre, but they were gonna put one house here and we're asking them to consider putting a triplex instead. You know, you wouldn't have to do 5 single-family homes plotted around an acre. Senator Harrison, and it's
I'd
a discussion,
like you
yeah.
all to go with me to my local planning commission that's already having me in.
I went to some neighbors this weekend. You're welcome to borrow my PowerPoint if you try. Senator Harrison.
Thank you. When I read this, at first I thought that it meant that the action of making a decision wouldn't then be taken as a way of changing the bylaws themselves. But I think the intent is that the towns abide by the bylaws, is what I'm hearing.
I think both things are true, right?
Oh, interesting.
Because you're not changing a bylaw through the issuance of a permit. The bylaw is what is supposed to guide the
Right.
issuance of the permit, so you can't use that to change what's already been set.
Right. But-
And then,
But if you read this literally,
Mhm.
I think it does say that, but maybe we can have a chat another time.
Is there, do you want to circle something where it? you
Well-
feel like it does?
Well, just for example, like, shall not increase the minimum lot size required in the municipal bylaws. I would suggest that we say shall not require a larger lot size than that required in the municipal bylaws, so that it can't be contrary to the bylaws. I think that's what the intent is.
If permits can't change bylaws.
Well, that's what I thought
Yeah, that's what I
initially
thought
they
this was
meant.
about.
But it doesn't make sense that a permit would change the bylaws, although maybe there's something in case law where you say, oh, you did
No.
it 7 times, so then it's.
no, and I'm happy to work on this language. It is a tricky thing to draft because municipalities structure it so differently. And so if a developer or someone who's applying for a permit isn't actually applying for the maximum, this is not imposing the maximum, but it's prohibiting the town from making undue adjustments to the application without justifying why that would be necessary.
And that makes sense, but, and maybe we can talk about that
No,
another time.
I get it, like, you
Okay.
know, I think working on wording changes that you feel make a difference is something that we often do
Okay.
offline, but it's helpful to know like an example of what you're thinking of.
Yeah, and this is just
Was
our
that
first
enough of
block.
an example?
That was a good example,
Okay.
yeah, like
Yes.
just, yeah, you have a
Okay.
great local brain.
Okay.
Local government brain, so, you know, if you think there's ways to make sure it's clear that we're not
Yeah.
departing from the bylaws.
Okay,
Yeah,
Okay,
I'll circle that.
yeah, and the others too, but we
Right,
can
right.
talk about those. Okay, good, thanks.
Okay, so the next section, section 11 is an appropriation. So on page 14, the sum of $500,000 is appropriated from the general fund to the municipal and regional planning fund for the purpose of assisting municipalities in updating their bylaws to reflect the changes made in this act. So the municipal and regional planning fund already exists. We talked about it a little bit last year in this committee. The Department of Housing and Community Development administers it. It is currently primarily funded by part of the property transfer tax. And so there's a formula in statute. So some of the money goes to the regional planning commissions and some of the money goes to the municipal pot, and municipalities apply for grants to use the funding there to make changes either to their town plan or whatever stage they're at in their municipal zone planning and zoning they can apply to use these funds to do that work. And so this is providing additional increase since towns will need to update their bylaws.
Senator Harrison?
A question, often it can take 2 years to update bylaws. Is there a deadline to update or would we consider some sort of expedited process?
So I will say that the effective date on the sections we have reviewed is pushed out until December 1, 2024 to accommodate the time needed for these changes. So you can consider if that is enough. The other thing I would say is that in absence of updated bylaws, the statute controls. So,
Okay.
yeah.
And I'm just, Wendy, we've had money in for the last 2 years on bylaw modernization, 2 or 3 years, anyway, last 2 years. And we've had a big uptake on it. And I think all the money may have been used. Anyway, I can't remember how, I know it was robustly used and towns applied for it and have been using it. I just don't know. I can't remember if we had an update on how much money was left in that fund. And if this, because this is roughly what we had put, or we put more aside initially.
So I think the first year was 500,000 and then the second year was 650,000.
It was a little more.
It was.
Because
yeah.
it was so well used.
Yeah.
So I'd love just a marker on this, just to get an update on how well used the bylaw modernization, because this goes hand in glove with that work.
Right.
And I think Chris started to talk about that.
Yeah, he did.
And just something to consider, if I would suggest that the process of the bylaw updates for municipalities is very long and includes a lot of public outreach, as it should. But if a town is just complying with something that the state is imposing, the public's not really going to be able to, public input is just going to be explanatory. They won't have an impact.
It'll be public
Right.
outrage, I'm sure.
Right. So it might be easier and better to just have a quicker program or process.
Yeah.
In those situations.
We're basically telling towns how they have to zone.
Yes, we're gonna hear from.
Right.
PLCT.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I'm just
Yeah.
putting in our head that maybe a quicker, cheaper process
Okay.
might be better in situations like this, when there's really no choice.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is something that you should consider about what you want the effective date to actually be. I would only just add that because one of the sort of mechanisms you're using in this bill is in areas served by sewer and water infrastructure, you do want to make sure that the towns that have those systems have them mapped so that it is
I know, that's another question.
Yeah.
I have a lot of
So
questions.
that they
on that.
know.
State
yeah.
didn't allow Montpelier
Yeah.
to build their water and sewer to meet this kind of growth. And I'm sure we're not the only city that had that happen. And if I come up against a high density subsidized housing project and a new major employer, and I have limited water and sewer capacity, who dictates where that decision gets made? And we turned down Ben and Jerry's because they would have eaten up our sewer capacity.
So I think we'll hear and we'll want to have a philosophical discussion about using municipal water and sewer capacity as a guidepost for development, because it will
We
create
did the limit
rivers.
development.
Exactly. And I think that's just a big question. We'll have to ask, or do we want to incentivize growth in certain areas and say, you're only eligible for certain funds if you designate this as a neighborhood development area and benefits flow from that. So I think that's big. I totally get it. It's a big question on the table about what if this means towns don't do municipal sewer and water just to avoid, having to fall under this.
Well, it's a very expensive process to do
Yeah.
municipal sewer and water.
Mhm.
And yeah, I
Sure
like
is.
the status quo, I wouldn't put it in.
Well, it's a,
Yeah, I have a
Yeah.
lot of questions on that.
Yeah.
Just because we don't define service areas
Mhm,
either,
mhm.
and that might be something that we want to do.
Talk
Right.
about.
Water and sewer service areas, and then water or sewer, and then what about private sewer
Mhm.
or private water?
we have a
Does that
great,
count?
we have a
Only
great
for
committee for this.
Private
process.
water systems, I
You
think.
I think there's
you
more.
pay a ready
We
to
have two
use-
in
Oh, some
Vernon.
associations, so,
Yeah.
You
but
pay a ready to serve fee and the city pumps your septic system once a year.
So we
This is
there's
what
just
we-
a
we
lot
will
of
bookmark this
variations, so,
discussion,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah, okay.
Ellen
towns, I
can't
think,
solve
not
this problem for us, so
So like,
let's let
Right.
Ellen continue, and that will.
Okay, so, leaving the municipal zoning realm. So on page 14, section 11A is a different topic, though related. So housing resource navigator for regional planning commissions. The Vermont Association of Planning and Development Agencies, which is the umbrella agency for the regional planning commissions, shall hire housing resource navigators, which shall serve underserved communities by working with municipalities, local housing organizations, and private developers to identify housing opportunities, match communities with funding resources, and provide project management support. There is appropriated the sum of $300,000 in fiscal year 2024 to VAPTA for the purpose of hiring the housing navigators as described. So this, I drafted this language, and I think that this is a trickier issue than it may initially seem. VAPTA does, and you should hear from them.
Mhm.
I don't think VAPTA currently has employees like the way that this is envisioned.
right,
Yeah.
individual RPCs do, but not.
Right.
VAPTA.
And they are not, the RPC employees are not state employees, so I couldn't like create a position in statute. So you may just want to, you should hear from VAPTA on how they would handle this, and if this is the proper way to actually structure this,
And the amount, because,
and the amount.
which is very low.
Yeah, I was
for-
gonna say, that's 3 employees.
Yeah, I think
You
that's
figure
probably.
salary
Yeah.
and
I mean,
benefits
this is
and
not
not,
much.
no.
I just asked Mick to make sure Scott puts them on the witness list. I think I got confused about the Planners Association and.
Yes, so this
Oh,
is a
planners
different,
is different.
yes, the planners are a different association, but this is the umbrella agency for the.
And
region.
neither could really do this. We have to figure
No,
out.
the RPCs can do it, but, yeah,
Mhm.
anyway, the amount is very low and the,
Yeah,
And this is a new program, so it would be ongoing funds.
yes, so that's another
goes
issue.
hand in
Yes.
glove with the index idea. I mean,
Oh,
with the
this
helping
one's
our rural
fantastic.
communities. Actually, this is the technical assistance
Yeah.
on which we can add more.
Right, we do like technical assistance, but maybe
And that's
there's a
what-
bigger pot of money that's out there.
But this kind of goes hand in glove with that.
Great, okay, thank you, Ellen.
All right, so section 12 starts the Act 250 amendments.
No big deal.
All right, so at the bottom of page 14, onto page 15, the definition of development means each of the following. So as you will recall from your Act 250 discussions in the past, the definition of development is what sets the jurisdictional triggers for which projects require an Act 250 permit. Currently, under the statute, there is a concept called the priority housing projects, and we'll look at the definition fully on the next page. But currently, 10 or more units of housing that is constructed trigger Act 250. Also, we have the 1 acre and 10 acre towns, and so in a 10 acre town, 10 or more acres trigger Act 250, or 1 or more acres of commercial development trigger Act 250. And so starting there are 2 changes that are happening on page 15. So first, development means the construction of housing projects, such as cooperatives, condos, or dwellings, or construction or maintenance of mobile homes or mobile home parks with 20 or more units constructed or maintained on a tract or tracts of land owned or controlled by a person within a radius of 5 miles of any point on any involved land within a continuous period of 5 years. So as I just mentioned, currently under the statute, 10 units of housing constructed triggers Act 250, and so this is increasing that to 20. Next, currently in statute, all the language that's struck starting on line 6, that language establishes a cap on the number of priority housing projects within a project that are exempt. And so what that means is that priority housing projects are exempt from Act 250 if they meet the number of housing units based on the size of the town. And so currently, 75 or more units in a municipality with a population between 6,000 and 10,000. Once you hit 75, you trigger Act 250, so you can build 74 units and be exempt.
We changed this last year.
Yeah, so if you look on line 15, last year you removed the smallest cap. So towns with up to from 0 to 6,000 population can build up to 49 units. At 50, they trigger Act 250 again. And so this is removing all of the caps and just saying any construction of priority housing projects is exempt.
And that is sort of designated areas.
Yeah.
Which is where we're talking about downtown and core centers.
Yes, there's more details on that on the next page. And so further down on line 19 as well, currently it says the word development does not include the construction of priority housing projects in a municipality with a population of 10,000 or more. So now it just says development does not include the construction of a priority housing project.
And, you know, this is what the governor was talking about in his address about Middlebury and the housing project that in a much lower cap than they otherwise wanted to be able to. So, yeah, Senator Carson.
So we don't use the word priority housing between lines 1 and 6. But my understanding is if it's a priority housing project, it's exempt, period, no matter what it says.
That's true, that's at the bottom now.
It says that now at the bottom.
Yes, so you're right. There are two concepts happening on this page. The first is general housing, 20 units or more will trigger Act 250. And at the bottom now it says the construction of any priority housing projects that is exempt.
And
Priority.
it's defined later on.
So do you want to talk about that now? The definition is on the next page. So on page 16, we can jump down to line 13, and this is the definition of a priority housing project. So it is a discrete project located on a single tract or multiple contiguous tracts of land that consists exclusively of mixed income housing or mixed use or any combination thereof, and is located entirely within a designated downtown, designated new town center, a designated village center that has permanent zoning and subdivision bylaws, designated growth center, or designated neighborhood development area. So this means it's a mixed-use housing project or a mixed income housing project in a designated center. And those two phrases are defined in Act 250. So a mixed use project, I've already mentioned, is a mix of commercial and residential with a emphasis on affordable, because it uses the definition of mixed income housing. So mixed income, I know that this is going to sound confusing, and the MRB has a really great flow chart to explain this, so we can give you that so that it's a little more clear than how I'm explaining it. But mixed income housing is it can be either owner occupied or rental, but at least 20% of the housing units are affordable for at least 15 years.
This was the challenge that you'll recall Senate Natural Resources
And affordable,
debated last year.
So affordable is also defined for both rental and owner occupied housing, and it's does not exceed 30% of the gross annual income of a household at 80% of the highest of county median income, area median income, or statewide median income. And so, so under this not every unit needs to be affordable. Only 20% of the units need to be affordable for 15 years. And affordable is defined as 30% of income, either area median income, state median income, or county median income.
Whichever's less, probably, right?
I think it says the greatest, but I think that potentially VHFA works on this. So I am not an expert on how that actually works. So you can hear more about how that works in practice.
Senator Harrison.
Just a quick, is there a mixed use that's just commercial and residential together? Because that's what other places in the country call mixed use. Or does that
That's what-
not exist?
That's what
in-
this
in-
is.
in-
So-
Right, but without the affordability component.
Oh, no,
Okay,
no,
okay,
there is an affordability requirement.
okay.
But only for 15 years.
I understand.
And
Yeah.
I mean,
Just wondering
as we
if-
sort of dive right into the heart of the Act 250 section, just want to say for anyone listening, we're trying to focus any Act 250 changes specifically on housing
Right.
in designated growth areas. We're getting outreach about, can you solve all of our problems in Act 250? And we will only be considering issues pertaining to housing in Act 250.
Yeah, that's really good to say. And I would say that mixed use is relevant because it
Yes.
makes housing better. And more desirable.
And it makes downtowns and
And the transportation
yes.
limits.
so that touches housing, but yes.
The
Yeah.
Wilson Block in Springfield's a classic example of this. We went and toured it and, it's mixed use, commercial first floor and affordable units upstairs. And I think some of them are market rate, some of them are affordable.
The entire Barry Street, the condos and the rental units are mixed.
And these are mostly
Market.
priority projects. So, it's great. I would love to, I don't know who keeps the data on this, but I would love to see what happens to the priority projects after 15 years. How many actually go straight up to market rate? How many stay affordable? I'd love to see what.
VHFA is our starting place for data. They might be.
That's right.
They don't.
VH, and I'll ask Leslie that question because I hope they track long-term what happens to it. Because I think that was the concern that Senate Natural debated quite a bit last year, right? Is that whole issue of, well, why are we putting public money into something that's eventually not going to be affordable anymore?
Mhm. And I think we're gonna hear, could we do more to incentivize housing within Act 250 that's, net zero energy, fossil fuel free. I mean, we might be able to look at even further at, other ways to incentivize getting rid of duplication from different state agencies in Act 250 with fossil fuel changes. Yeah.
So the one caveat I'd say is, yes, this bill deals exclusively with Act 250 issues in housing. But I think we fool ourselves in thinking that Act 250 changes can be done in a vacuum, just dealing with this one thing. Because I think one of the biggest challenges we have faced is that we faced for the last 3 years on this bill and on these changes has been what we get to further protect and what we do to green light. And I think those are challenging challenges to balance. And I think you can't do just this. I mean, we're doing just this, but someone else is going to have to do something else.
It's fair. Housing committee should try to do housing.
Absolutely.
it's a
And
bigger
we have been
conversation.
trying
Yes.
for several years, but it's always, we've hit that challenge.
Right.
Is that fair?
Oh, gosh.
I don't know.
That's
I
not
gotcha.
an Ellen question.
That's
But we're getting.
that's an us question.
So on page 16, there are two other changes here in the definition of development. And I drafted them separately from the priority housing language, so we may need to check if they layer correctly, but So at the top of page 16, line 1, notwithstanding subdivision 4 of this subdivision, the construction of improvements in a designated neighborhood development area for a housing project or mixed-use development with 10 or more units constructed or maintained on a tract or tracts of land owned or controlled by a person is development, because the lead-in language there is development includes the following. So this is creating a specific jurisdictional trigger for designated development area, neighborhood development areas for the construction of 10 or more units. So this is, and it's removing the 5-year 5-mile rule. So you may have heard when I read on page 15 that the general language currently for housing projects is 10 or more units on one or more tract, owned or controlled by a person, constructed within 5 years and within 5 miles of each other. That triggers Act 250. So this is saying in a neighborhood development area, 10 units of housing triggers Act 250, but it does not include the restriction of within 5 years or 5 miles.
Thank you, very clear explanation.
So it doesn't include the 5 mile or the 5.
Years. So I drafted this so we can, I'm just gonna take ownership of this, but it may not layer properly with the changes you're making to the priority housing exemption. And I just, we need to maybe think through that because of the phrase mixed use there is sort of what I'm thinking. So technically, as we just discussed with Senator Harrison, mixed use as defined in Act 250 includes affordable housing. And so there's a possibility that someone could build a mixed use development that wouldn't be a priority housing project, but it's extremely unlikely because if they're building the mixed use, they're probably hitting the priority housing project exemption. So at least that aspect of this, you may just want to consider if that's redundant because it is in the neighborhood development area.
Okay.
So that's just a flag.
Okay.
Because and so again, and you're talking specifically about housing projects here on line 3 also. And so that would cover market rate housing projects, non-affordable housing projects. But with the definition of mixed use, those are going to have some component of affordability.
Okay. Like that.
But as it's written, it includes market and affordable,
So the definition
because
of
housing
Mixed use
project,
is just
the
commercial and
housing project
residential.
could be,
yes, housing project,
Could be
yes,
high end.
is probably high end or market
yes,
rate.
okay.
But mixed use, as defined in the statute, includes affordability.
Okay.
And so then nearly identical language, again, starting with line 7 under the definition of subdivision. So the other way you trigger Act 250 is if you are subdividing land. And so like with commercial, it's 10 lots being subdivided in a 10-acre town triggers Act 250, or 6 lots in a town without permanent zoning and subdivision rules triggers Act 250. So this is creating again another separate provision that says subdivision means each of the following: a tract or tracts of land owned or controlled by a person that the person has partitioned or divided for the purpose of resale into 10 or more lots located within a designated neighborhood development area. So it's again removing the 5-year 5-mile rule. Okay, the next section on page 17 is a small change, again, related to priority housing projects. So it's 10 VSA 6081P. And so this is striking again the other reference to the caps on priority housing projects. So no permit or permit amendment is required for a priority housing project in a designated area, in a designated center. And so it's striking the reference to the jurisdictional thresholds, which is what we've called the caps.
Yep.
Okay, so that is the Act 250 language. And so next is an entirely different subject.
Well, it goes back in part to what we were talking about earlier, which are covenants,
Covenants,
Right.
yes.
which we've addressed in prior years also.
Yes. So section 13 on page 17 is amending step 27 VSA 545. And 545 is the section that this committee had added in previous years. And so that is staying intact. So the existing language on line 8 is that deed restrictions, covenants, or similar binding agreements added after March 1st, 2021 that prohibit or have the effect of prohibiting land development allowed under 4412(1)(e), which is accessory dwelling units, and 2A, which are the existing small lots, shall not be valid. So the existing law is that these covenants cannot, new covenants cannot be added that would prohibit accessory dwelling units or small, or the development of a small lot. Those provisions are invalid. So new language is added on line 11. So deed restrictions or covenants added after July 1, 2023 shall not be valid if they require a minimum dwelling unit size on the property or more than one parking space per dwelling unit. So this is again, you're in the earlier sections, you're getting at these issues by dictating what the municipality can or can't do. And this is saying private parties in their deed restrictions can't subvert those statutory requirements by putting something in the deed that would require minimum building size or parking space minimums.
That parking base minimum is gonna be an issue if you're talking. Most people have two cars. One works in Burlington and one works in White River. And the cars are gonna get parked somewhere. And where is that going to be?
So it still is allowing, the developers still have the ability to construct these parking spaces, but the town can't require them. And the provision can be added in the deed restriction that requires them.
Okay, but if you don't have to add more than one, that's money. It's money that's gonna go in the developer's pocket and especially if you're talking affordable units, not high end. High end, he can put 2 or 3, it's an amenity. But the town is going to be
Yeah.
left to deal with the parking.
We hear that this is a concern, and I think that we'll have witnesses where this debate can be had. I think Alex reached her capacity of, how she can respond to it.
Yeah, no,
Yeah. But it was
that
flagged.
one,
This is a municipal flag,
yes.
unlike, of course, the other sections.
Sorry.
What proportion of the housing in the state is covered by covenants? I mean, just
Each town has
roughly.
different covenants. Different
Right.
projects have different covenants.
Well, many of them don't have any at all. I mean, the
Correct.
older
Right.
places,
Right.
Right,
I mean,
but
like HOAs aren't very common here was my understanding, but
a
maybe
lot of
that's not the
condos
case.
have no laundry, no bird feeders, no
Oh.
political signs,
Mhm.
no real estate signs.
Well, we removed language that said no black people, no Jewish
Oh
people.
my.
I mean, that
Okay.
existed.
Well,
Yeah.
We
yeah.
removed a bunch of
So-
covenants
Yeah.
with Jen, I can see Jen Holler right there in the
Right,
witness
right.
chair.
So
advocating for
we
this
have,
change.
and I think it was a surprise to everyone, but if
Yeah.
you look at historical records, some of these covenants were never removed.
Right.
So I don't know that we have.
Right.
it.
Yeah, they're still there.
I was just wondering
Yeah.
about how many,
It's a good question. How
All right,
many, my
So
guess
I
is
don't know if
there.
we have like a covenant expert.
They were
Or
wealthier
HOAs,
developed, yeah, I mean,
Okay.
they're there. They haven't been enforced.
homeowners.
They're
association.
illegal, but they're still sitting somewhere on your deed, but it's come up several times. It is very expensive process to alter a deed.
Oh, right, so
A
this,
deed it's on the deed and the deed passes it's illegal. It hasn't been enforced in 100 years, but it still sits there. And people are very upset that I'm sure it still says, I can only build colonial architecture and I don't know what else.
All right, I misunderstood. I thought these would be only covenants with HOAs, but these are
No.
individual deeds. So someone could
These are-
Yes.
put on their individual deed and it carried down 100 years.
It's like the view
I
shed
see. Okay.
restrictions.
Got
and- Yeah.
Thank
And-
you.
And used a lot in downtown commercial development in terms of setbacks and open space and
Yes.
and art. Wow.
Another way that it comes up in the smaller developments is if a person has a large property and they want to sell off one single lot to someone to just raise some money, and they put a lot of deed restrictions on the property in an attempt to sort of mitigate any impact their neighbors may have on them.
Okay.
But we have seen the prior, actually, the language that was passed by this committee, that's on line 8. There was a court case on a property that had intentionally said that the subdivided property couldn't have an ADU. And so while that had been established in statute as allowing ADUs, the deed restriction had limited,
Interesting. Okay.
disallowed.
Okay. Interesting. All right. Thank you.
And will just say that this section, as with the already existing language, is prospective. So it's not going to invalidate existing
Right.
deeds. It's prospective. These covenants cannot be added.
Okay.
Okay, so page 18 is sort of, now we're in like grab bag topics. So section 8, or page 18, section 14 is an interesting topic, road disclosure. So new language added to title 27, disclosure of maintenance on class 4 highway. Any property owner who sells property located on a class 4 highway or legal trail shall disclose to the buyer that the municipality is not required to maintain the highway or trail as described in 19 VSA section 310. Non-compliance with the requirements of this section shall not affect the marketability of the title of a property.
And any realtor that values their license will disclose that.
And any other rights of way. I mean, there are other rights of way other than class 4 roads.
So it could be for sale by owner, in some situations where.
So this is not making any change to that type of thing, just requiring property owners to disclose that the property is on a class 4 highway. And by definition, class 4 highways are those that are not maintained. And so that includes paving and plowing.
Plowing is the big one.
Plowing is the big one, yeah.
So does this include other rights of way that might be in a deed or or those articulated already in a deed?
So like a utility right of way, or what kind of right of way?
Neighbor right of way.
Like a native, and let's say you have a landlocked piece, you have a completely
Yeah.
surrounded piece of property.
So
There are
what
often
about
rights of
class
ways
4
for
road?
driveways and other ways of accessing a piece of land.
Yeah, I
Are they
sold one. It was on a class 4 road. There was a driveway, there was a house, but there was a right of way to a seasonal mobile home in the woods. And I believe that's all in the deed. And this was within 2 miles of this building. I mean, it's not
Right, but
out there.
is that already covered, the rights of way in other places?
So I am not a real estate expert.
Right.
I would
mean,
just
this
say
is just
that
one type.
this is specific. Largely, a right of way is established through the deed.
That's-
And so if it isn't, there usually is a court case to establish the right of way.
Right.
And so this is not about that. And I don't know what the other requirements related to those things are specifically. I am not the real estate attorney technically.
Septic easements is
Septic, sure you have that. The septic.
highly regulated, but
Thank goodness, she says. I have enough on my platter.
I'm an expert in municipal sludge.
Well, great, we're about to talk about it. Okay, great segue. And so finally,
The sludge section.
is language that your committee has reviewed multiple times.
It has.
There is only one small change to it that I will highlight. So on page 18, there are a pair of sections, section 15 and 16. And this is what has been called reducing the duplicative permits. I'm not sure everyone would characterize it that way, but currently under statute, and just a reminder, I am not the wastewater attorney, and so if you want a detailed explanation of how these things work, I can get you an attorney or you can hear from A&R. But currently under statute, connecting to the wastewater system requires a permit both from the Department of Environmental Conservation, the state agency, as well as the municipality. And so this is laying out an exemption from the state permit if the municipality does certain things. So section 15 on page 18 says, the following projects are exempt, following projects and actions are exempt, and that's from the state permit. A project completed by a person who receives an authorization from a municipality that administers a program registered with the secretary pursuant to section 1983 of this title. And so 1983 is section 16. The language is on page 19. And that reads, a municipality may issue an authorization for a connection or an existing connection with a change in use to the municipal sanitary sewer connection line via a sanitary sewer service line, or a connection to a water main via a new water service line in lieu of permits issued under this chapter, provided that the municipality documents the following in a form prescribed by the secretary. The municipality owns or has legal control over connections to a public community water system permitted pursuant to chapter 56 of this title, and over connections to a wastewater treatment facility permitted pursuant to chapter 47 of this title. The municipality shall only issue authorizations for a sanitary sewer service line that connects to a sanitary sewer collection line and a water service line that connects to a water main. The building or structure authorized under this section connects to both the sanitary sewer collection line and the public community water system. The authorizations from the municipality comply with the technical standards for sanitary sewer service lines and water service lines in the wastewater system and potable water supply rules. The municipality requires documentation issued by a professional engineer or licensed designer that is filed in the land records that the connection authorized by the municipality was installed in accordance with the technical standards. The municipality requires the authorization to be filed in the land records. So that's the only new provision to this, is filing it in the land records. And the municipality requires the retention of plans that show the location and design of the authorized connections. The municipality shall notify the secretary 30 days in advance of terminating any authorization. The municipality shall provide all authorizations and plans to the secretary as part of this termination notice. A municipality issuing an authorization under this section shall require the person to whom the authorization is issued to post notice of the authorization as part of the notice required for a permit issued under 4449 of Title 24 or other bylaw authorized under this chapter. Okay, so there's a lot there, but basically, in order for projects to be exempt from the state project permit, the town has to meet all these requirements and demonstrate to the state that it has done all of these things. A lot of them just require sort of the documentation that the standards are being met.
And when you said this one piece is new, Senator Harrison, that just means we've looked at this language in committee at least twice.
Yeah.
Or,
For several years.
I have been trying to do away with the duplicative permits along with Jeff Wenberg, former mayor of Rutland, for over a quarter of a century. Mostly, everything goes through the municipality. It's the municipality's water and sewer. It just is a double fee. The state doesn't come out and do anything. You just charge a developer. And this says you only get exempt from paying that if you're on both water and sewer. There are a lot of places that are on municipal water or municipal sewer, but their lot provides plenty of space for septic or for a well. And this would mean I'd have to pay a double fee to hook up to the city sewer unless I was also hooking up to the city water.
so you're thinking of maybe an or instead of an and.
Yeah.
Yeah, that, I have a bunch of questions, but
Yeah.
I can go through them pretty quickly, and I agree. I was wondering why it's and. So obviously what you looked at previously didn't get passed.
That's right. Sorry,
Okay,
that wasn't
well,
clear.
thank you for your effort. But this is,
Yeah.
but maybe this is the year.
That's right.
No, this makes so much sense to me. No,
This
it makes
is
so
the
much sense.
least-
Yeah, yeah.
This is still when the state was sure that the towns were gonna put Levittown all over the place
There's,
and just,
yeah,
yeah. And
yeah, I totally agree.
it's the nanny state.
So, just a couple questions on how this would work.
Also efficient.
Right. No, there's a lot of reasons to do this, and, but I wasn't gonna go into those. I was just gonna go into the process.
Yeah.
Do towns need prior authorization from the state? It looks as if they do not,
For what?
to be able to do this.
Yes, they do.
Okay, is that said somewhere else?
It's the first, so it's in combination with the prior section. So the municipality administers a program that is registered with the state, with the
Okay.
secretary.
Okay, so
And then subdivision A lays out that they can do this if they document the following items, provide that to the Secretary of A&R.
perfect. So they're registered with the state as an authorized town to do this. Okay,
Yes.
cool.
Everybody.
So I would just, a couple picky things. I would just say municipality may issue an authorization for a new connection or an existing connection with a change in use. Is something I would look at, or a connection or change to a water main via a new water service line. And if we have different service areas, yeah, that's what I was thinking too, is can a municipality, say the municipality only has water and not sewer, can they be part of this program?
I don't know.
Okay, I would hope that they could.
And there are private water systems.
Like
Right, well, those,
Woodstock, I believe there aren't that many towns that have private town.
No, it's not private. It's a privately owned business that provides
Right.
water to most of East Montpelier.
Yeah, so Woodstock also has a private water system, which
Right.
we're hoping that will change in the future, but there are several towns that depend on private water systems.
Right, and it's not a fire district. I mean,
Right.
well, we just bought it out, but part of Montpelier was a fire district because the private water system caved in, literally, the well caved in.
Okay.
So, I mean, there's just this huge.
Right, a lot of
mixed
variability.
bag, yeah.
I think it's okay to limit this to municipalities at first, just to make it happen.
It needs to happen.
Okay,
So my,
So-
sorry, did you?
yeah, just a couple,
Yeah.
and then an or instead of an and is what I would
Yeah.
suggest also, but that's a.
What line is that?
On line 11, just that the municipality owns or has legal control over connections or over connections to a wastewater treatment facility, but perhaps some other committee wanted it to be and.
Well,
It's.
we can start with
But
what
that's-
people
discussion.
would like.
Yeah.
And then that's kind of the same comment on number 3. And then sometimes you want to require pre-treatment as a owner of a septic or a wastewater facility. So I would just want to put that in. That the municipality is authorized to require pre-treatment, but that may be in the registration.
I think let's pause.
Sure, I don't.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Oh,
I
is that
think-
too much?
so what
I'm sorry.
What I'm
Okay.
hearing is that maybe some people want to workshop this section with Michael Brady. the-
Yeah, or I can even do it
our
offline. If-
Well,
Yeah,
online
that's
would
what
be
she's
with the
implying.
ledge
Well, I-
council.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
fine.
I mean,
Yeah,
part
yeah.
of it is that some of you have been working on this for years. Some of us come from a municipal background.
Mhm, yeah,
and
yeah.
I've been working on the other side of it for years.
Right.
In the first half of this, we're assuming that towns try and stop housing, or at least lower income housing or dense housing. And so we're stopping them. And yet here, where they could stop housing by not having enough water sewer capacity, we're assuming that they're just willy-nilly passing it out. And I think what I'm missing is probably what you've heard in the past is is zoning why is this a perverse thing? Or is it just a few wealthy towns? Is this a perverse thing where towns are discriminating in housing? Or, why aren't we building housing? I'm not clear. I've got a lot of answers, but I haven't heard the testimony that tells me what the problem is we're trying to fix.
And that's the walkthrough versus all the testimony we'll
Right.
have. And
Okay.
I just want to make it clear too, and VLCT's, invited with, in the same group, there's not you're against, so you have to wait 2 weeks or whatever. But it's not always the towns that stop the housing, it's the processes that may or may not exist, where someone in the community has the
The appeal.
appeal
That's the
process
appeal.
and the.
That I don't
Yeah.
mind
Right.
having gone,
And we have appeals in here.
yes.
There's one, there's one.
Yes.
Yes,
Well,
We
there's
may
two,
want to
actually,
do
there's
that.
two provisions.
There are 2 provisions for limiting appeals, but I think there are lots of barriers. And this, we're just addressing a couple here,
Right,
but
I
there
think- I
are other
think-
barriers that
But
we
this,
know about.
having sat on both the regional and the municipal planning commissions, this is a major power grab from the communities. And the parking to me, and I'm the one that was always against the parking replacement fees. But I also know that parking is the biggest issue in this city. And
So I just, yeah.
to be exacerbating that, it's a major change.
It's a big change.
These are
Yes.
big
I
changes.
would just like to say, I did want to give us a break, but I would really before noon like to get Damien through his few sections so we can let both Damien and Ellen go back to the rest of their lives and, start with Becky and David next week on different sections. The whole rest of the week is then devoted to having this conversation with
Okay.
witnesses that you want to have. So if it's okay, if people just take a break
5 minutes.
as 5,
So 11:15.
Damien, yeah. And let's just see if we can get
Sure.
Damien out of here in 45 minutes. He has some kind of miscellaneous civil rights kind of stuff.
Yeah, he's got, I think, 3 or 4 sections.
Right. Thank you so much,
Thank
Ellen.
you.
This is a lot of, this is dense. It was much appreciated. And as you know, you may have seen that I asked David as the sort of umbrella drafter for this. We're clearly getting to a point where toward the end of the week, both for our sake and people trying to follow along, we'd love to try and have a section by section that's very brief, where we can follow modifications we make to the bill as we go and where those live. So that we'll just hope to, have that from you as part of a larger section by section. And then we'll bring you back in. It doesn't have to, I
We
mean,
will
you
do
know,
our best.
yes,
to
exactly.
accomplish
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, and I'll write back to David, but very brief, just a way to keep track of literally new things that
Right.
happen.
Sort of like that flow chart that NR.
So we're back.
I mean,